I'm David Mirza, founder and online coach at the Hot Daddy Factory that works with guys between 30 and 50 that want to get in the best shape of their lives in a record time frame while taking their training to the next level, optimizing their sleep, and without sacrificing their work performance. It's Tier List Tuesday, and today we're going to rank chest exercises. We're going to rank exercises based on their effectiveness when it comes to building muscle. We are going to consider a bunch of different factors such as how mechanically efficient the movements are, how joint friendly they are, and how advanced you need to be to perform them. But why should you listen to me, you might ask rightfully? Well, I spent almost close to a decade now getting guys in incredible shape, and one of the main factors that helps me do that is helping with their training. I've also spent the last 10 years learning and thinking about mechanics, exercise mechanics, and biomechanics, and as sad as it sounds, that's pretty much all I think about. And of course I hang out a lot with my friend Bonaparte that helps me understand these concepts better. Alright, so let's look at some chest exercises. I made 5 different tiers. The top one is essential. It means if your training is mainly consisting of these movements, you're probably in the right place. Second tier is great. You will probably want to include loads of these exercises in your program as well. Middle tier is depends why. It means these exercises will probably come in handy in certain situations, but it depends on what context you use them in. The next category is likely subpar. You will probably have to find a really good reason to justify an exercise that ends up in this category. Category 5 is just simply don't do them. There's no reason you should ever do those exercises. So we have 24 exercises here. Let's rank them. Obviously, when it comes to these exercises, there are different variations to them. So pretty much with every chest exercise that you will do, there's one variation for your upper, one for the middle, and one for the lower fibers of the chest. So we're not going to, for example, rank incline, flat, and decline dumbbell presses separately. They will all go under the umbrella of a dumbbell press. Same for cable flies. We're not going to go incline cable fly, flat, or decline cable fly. We're just going with cable flies in general. It's still early days for our channel, so if you're interested in anything, want to hear more about a certain topic, just leave a comment below and I'll try to make a video on that. Starting with the dumbbell press, it's a pretty basic movement in terms of everyone tries it pretty much as soon as they get in the gym, and I would rank it as essential because first of all, it gives you a nice freedom of movement when it comes to joint function. You can pronate as much as you want to, you can move your wrist as much as you need to with the dumbbells, you can have your upper arms lifted out as much as it is comfortable, and it certainly provides more range, for example, than a barbell press. It's also nice that it challenges 2 functions of the pec major, horizontal adduction as well as shoulder flexion. It's also fairly easy to learn and requires not much practice. Definitely belongs in the essential group. Next up is barbell press. This might be controversial, but I'm going to rank this lower. I'm putting it in the great category only. And the reason for that is, for loads of people, a barbell press forces them into a position that they can't efficiently target their chest with. Remember what we just said about the dumbbell press, that it provides a huge range of freedom when it comes to joint movement, in terms of letting your wrist move, letting your elbow move, whereas the bar already forces you in a position that you might not want to be in. I'm not saying it doesn't work for anyone, I'm saying there will be more people that it doesn't work for than a dumbbell press. When it comes to range, you will also be compromised once again. Some people will feel obliged to touch their chest and might not have the range for it, while others would be able to go further down, but the bar stops where it hits their chest. So it feels like it has some arbitrary range requirements that might not apply to your body specifically. In order to build muscle and get stronger, you also need to train close to failure. And what I find is, beginners, especially when they train by themselves, find it harder to go to failure on barbell exercises than it is on dumbbell exercises. Especially beginners will freak out and think that they will get squashed under the bar and are afraid to get those last few reps in, whereas with the dumbbell press, they might be able to do that. So overall, higher skill requirement, range limitations, joint limitations, and limitations on how hard you can push on it, and that's why it ends up in the great category only and not in the essential category like the dumbbell press did. Our next exercise is dumbbell floor presses. I'm going to rank these in the same category as the barbell press because they're relatively similar. A big disadvantage of the dumbbell floor press is, again, the range limitations it imposes on us. Meaning your upper arms can only go as far down as the floor is. It's a weird thing to say, but we cannot neglect it, that The friction from the floor makes it very difficult sometimes to organize your shoulder blades throughout the movement. Obviously, as you press, as you go down, you want to retract. As you push up, you let your shoulder blades protract a little, and that's hard to manage when you're against the floor. So that friction component for beginners might be an issue. Now, if you're not a beginner, what you will struggle with is picking the dumbbells up. Getting in position for a dumbbell floor press is not extremely easy. And in fact, now that I listed all these factors, I will probably put it in the depends why category as opposed to great. And its place will be taken over by the barbell floor press instead, which provides the same benefits as a dumbbell floor press does, but because it's a barbell, it's easier to unrack it so you can go heavier on it. You will also see for yourself that between a barbell press and between a barbell floor press, there's not a huge difference. Alright, next up is guillotine press. And this one quickly ended up in the just don't category. Just don't do it, and here's why. If you don't know, the guillotine press is when you lift your upper arm out enough on a barbell press that the bar ends up neck level. Instead of pressing here like you would on a barbell press, now you're out here. And what does that mean for us? This is a much weaker position for the shoulder joint. It's true you will find it easier to recruit the chest more because you simply increase the moment arm. You're further away from your chest now, so you will work the chest more. But at the same time, you're also bringing your shoulder in a much weaker position. So in combination, that means that because of this weaker joint position, you will have to sacrifice how much weight you put on the bar. There's literally no one out there that can guillotine press and barbell press the same weight. Also, no one should try it for the sake of their shoulder, like I just said. So now you got an extremely unstable exercise, an extremely hard to manage exercise at the joint level, and the trade-off is you have to put even less weight on and use less load on it. That's totally not a worthy trade-off. Today we live in a world when there's a machine created for everything you want to do. So if you did want to, regardless, press in this range with your upper arm lifted out to your side, you would be much better off finding a machine that can do that for you, that is more stable externally as well. So you don't have to worry as much about your joint position. What I find is, especially now looking at all these chest exercises, is a lot of these are just a remainder of the golden era, when gyms didn't have as many machines, so they had to come up with different variations targeting muscle groups differently, simply with dumbbells and barbells. But in our modern day, I don't feel many of these exercises are justified still. Which brings us to the next one, which is a dumbbell fly. Quickly ended up in the likely subpar category. The reason for that is you're challenging very little of your active range. Now do this with me. Your arm can go from here all the way to here. And whenever you perform a dumbbell fly, you're challenging this range extremely heavily. And as soon as you start going up, the weight drops off incredibly. And as soon as you start going up, the weight drops off a lot to the point where there's nearly zero challenge here. So basically you're dedicating a whole movement into challenging this range only. Now, because of this discrepancy between how much load goes through the shoulder joint here versus how much goes through here, this also is a very dangerous exercise for some people. If you're not aware of the weight getting heavier as you go down and controlling it, you might quickly end up in a position which is hard to manage at the shoulder. The only reason I'm putting it in the likely subpar category and not in the just don't do it category is that it's actually a very efficient way of training this lengthened, fully lengthened position of the chest and putting a stretch on it. So with different programming considerations, it can be a decent-ish finisher exercise. Let's say when you got everything out of your chest in the shortened range, you got everything out in the mid-range, and you still have some work capacity left in the lengthened range. That means maybe for a C or D exercise for chest, it's okay to do dumbbell flies with a reduced range just at the fully lengthened position. If you're talking about fly motions anyway, next up is the pec deck. A pec deck is a great exercise. Finally, something that challenges the shortened range of the muscle, meaning where your arms are closest together. Finally, you're training this as well, because any other press, if you think about it, dumbbell press, barbell press, nothing really challenges this, and especially not dumbbell flies. You're in a seated, stable position, which is easy to manage. You only have to worry about your arm going in and out. And there's not as big of a discrepancy when you go through the movement in different ranges, like there was with the dumbbell flies. The pec deck will be hardest in this this very safe joint position. And if anything, it gets a little bit lighter going towards here where the joint position is harder to manage anyway. But notice again the main difference. It's not like the Dumbbell Fly in terms of challenging one extreme only and not challenging anything else. The pec deck still challenges the whole range. Next up is the pec deck in an externally rotated position, meaning you're doing pec flies out here. This might look very similar to the previous pec deck in terms of your upper arm moving in and out, but notice the position we're in. This externally rotated position that the machine forces us in, we might not have available throughout the whole contractile range. This is probably a comfortable position for most of us. By the time we get to the bottom, this is probably will be a more uncomfortable position for most of us. Not to mention, you would still be able to go even lower and get more range in if you were not externally rotated. So compared to a normal pec deck, it implies range limitations, joint limitations, while providing no additional benefits. I put this in the likely subpar category because if you don't have any other means to do a fly, you don't have a cable stack, you don't have a pec deck, then it is justified to do this. But if there's any other way, you probably should not be doing this. Next up is the dumbbell pullover. Very unique exercise. Now you see, when you get in this overhead position, both your lats and your chest will work on bringing your upper arm back towards neutral. Which means with this exercise you can simultaneously hit your lats, your pecs, your serratus, and even the long head of your tricep. What I find is, it sounds great on paper, but I've never encountered anyone that actually feels this in their chest. Technically, your chest needs to work, but the limiting factor, what will always take over, will either be the long head of the tricep or the lats for everyone. So if you're doing this as a lat exercise, as a serratus exercise, or simply a mobility exercise to open up the front of your rib cage, it's a great choice. Picking it as an exercise to target the pecs is a waste of time. If you enjoyed this video and you feel like you're learning from it, please subscribe so you don't miss out on the upcoming ones. So far I think I've done a pretty good job at staying objective, but we're getting to the exercises now that trigger me the most. And that starts with the dumbbell squeeze press. You're laying on your back, pushing dumbbells together and pressing them upwards. Here, you might be feeling it in your chest, but your chest is only working isometrically, meaning it's not lengthening and contracting. Instead, you're applying constant tension on it while going up and down. In terms of chest development, there's very little difference between you doing a squeeze press and simply holding your hands and pressing them together very hard. The other issue is when it comes to building your chest, by pressing the dumbbells together, you brought your upper arm in by your side. As a rule of thumb, the further your upper arm gets away from your body, the more your chest will be leveraged, and the closer it gets to your body, the more your shoulder will be targeted. So what really happens here is your shoulder is working concentrically and eccentrically, lengthening and contracting, whereas your chest is under an isometric contraction the whole time, not lengthening nor shortening really. In addition to this, I have this terrible phobia that you're pressing the dumbbells together and your hands slip and you crush your fingers and break them, but that's not why it's a terrible exercise. Once again, ends up in the just don't do it category. Next up, Svent press. If there's anything that triggers me more than a squeeze press, it's the Svent press, because now that you're standing upright, there's this huge isometric component to it when you're holding the dumbbell in front of you that's only limited by your shoulder strength, your anterior delt strength. Notice here as well the huge discrepancy between how heavy the weight is here in front of you versus closer to your body. Same as a dumbbell fly, you're challenging only the very end range of the movement and not challenging the rest of the 90% of the range at all. If there was a category below just don't do it, it would be there. Next up is a landmine press. First thing I'm noticing is the stability component of it. In the end, you will struggle to hold your torso in place and it will limit your ability to put tension on the muscle. Remember what we said about guiding your elbow out away from your body versus guiding it in whenever you're targeting your chest versus your shoulder. Whenever you perform a landmine press, you will end up around here, which automatically again means that your shoulder and maybe the upper fibers of your chest will work, but not the rest of it. When it comes to building your chest, I simply would not do this exercise. Next up is a hardcore one again, Smith machine press. First of all, let's look at how this differs from a simple barbell press. You can immediately see that the main difference is the external stability provided by the machine, meaning the bar can go in any direction A Smith machine can only go up or down. This external stability provided by the machine makes a huge difference when you're approaching the last few reps of the set. I'm sure you know the feeling when you get to the point with the barbell press when you can't push anymore, not because it's necessarily so heavy, but because it's so unstable. Any kind of machine work, whether it's a Smith machine or a normal pressing machine, will aid you with this external stability. Whichever direction you push, it will only go upwards. So you can get much closer to failure and get more of these last few more productive reps. Now we determined that it doesn't impose any additional limitations than a barbell press, but it does offer extra benefits. So therefore it ends up in the top tier for me. Next up is a machine chest press, and when it comes to machine pressing, there are so many different brands and different variations. And how these machines are built will determine ultimately how efficient the exercise is. Some brands put a lot of attention into creating these machines in line with how your body actually works. Prime, Cybex and Atlantis are the main ones that come to mind. These machine presses would have the same benefits as a Smith machine press, providing you with external stability so you can work harder on them. And a lot of the time, depending on how they're designed, you will be able to get in much more joint-friendly positions as well. These three brands will often modify the resistance profile as well, making the exercise harder when you're stronger and easier when you're weaker. Therefore, a good machine chest press would definitely end up in the excellent category. There are other brands, however, that don't put as much attention into mechanics and biomechanics, and their pressing machines might be subpar, but even then, they would at least end up in the great category. Next up is pressing on a physio ball. Why is this a thing? Why would you not want to be stable? Same as how machines providing you with external stability is an advantage, similarly, taking that external stability away by putting you on a ball is a disadvantage. Just don't do it. Back to discussing some flies with the seated cable fly. What immediately comes to mind is that it's similar to a pec deck, but how do they really differ? But the main difference between a seated cable fly and the pec deck machine is that on a cable fly, you can modify what fibers of the chest you're trying to target, whether you're biasing for upper chest, middle or lower, and that you're able to tailor the resistance profile to your strength profile. Meaning, when performing a fly, you will be relatively weak in the fully shortened position, a little bit stronger but still a bit weaker at the fully lengthened position, and gradually getting stronger around the mid-range. While on a pec deck, this shortened position is being challenged the most. On a seated cable fly, depending on where you put the bench, how far forward you go from the cable stack, you can create a very nice drop-off in that weaker position. Meaning you can simply get more out of your reps because this range is not limiting you anymore. A slight compromise you're making is that it provides less stability than a pec deck. I would not give a seated cable fly to a beginner because it's really important that you move on the same plane of motion, meaning you finish and start every rep in the same position. While a pec deck forces you to be in that same position, with the seated cable fly there is room for inaccuracy. For beginners, this would be a great exercise. For advanced and above, it goes in the essential category. Next up is standing cable flies. Compared to a seated cable fly option, the only difference is that you don't have the external stability provided by the bench anymore. Meaning around the end, once again, when the reps are getting harder, the main limiting factor will be keeping your body in place as opposed to putting tension on the muscle. What you likely see in gyms as well, people have a very hard time keeping their rib cage and spine in the same position, keeping their balance, not moving around when it comes to those later stages of a set. Therefore, I would put this in the depends why category. If you don't have a pec deck machine and you don't have an option to put a bench or don't have the time to put a bench in front of a cable stack, then a standing cable fly would be an acceptable option. Next up is banded presses. If you're training at home, it's fine. If you're taking your bands to the gym or using bands to press in the gym, you're using the gym wrong. These exercises were okay during COVID. Now, if you go to a gym, you really should not be doing banded presses anymore. Next up is seated cable presses. What's really sweet about these is that once again, based on where you put the bench, you can create a slight drop off at the top. It also gives you a nice converging path of motion, meaning it pulls you from outside and you're going a little bit inwards and you stay challenged throughout the whole range. A huge limitation of this is the stability aspect of it. Most people, especially beginners, once they reach the end of the set, they will just start shaking like crazy. Therefore, I'm putting this into the depends why category. If you don't have a good pressing machine in your gym, then this can provide a very nice alternative. If you do have a nice pressing machine in your gym, you will find it difficult to give a good reason why you would incorporate this exercise other than for variation itself. Next up is a standing cable press. Now this provides you with all the benefits that a seated cable press does, but now you're losing the external stability again. We already determined with the seated cable press that the main issue is how unstable it is in the end. When I look at how people perform this exercise in the gym, as soon as they approach failure, instead of pressing the handles away from them, they start doing push-ups and pressing themselves away from the handle. So this exercise is likely subpar at best, and at worst, just don't do it. Next up is dips, very unique. It's not a normal pressing or fly exercise like the ones before. The limiting factor here will be shoulder stability. You need to be more advanced to be able to go down to the bottom and still keep the tension on your chest and not let it transfer onto the shoulders. If you actually want to use it to target your chest, then another consideration is that you have to stay leaning forward. The more upright you get, the more it turns into an anterior delt and tricep exercise. So instead you want to be leaning over, but that has a huge skill requirement. I think it's a great exercise, and I would go as far as saying it's essential when you're not a beginner. Another big advantage of dips is you can put a huge amount of load through. The resistance profile is pretty nice because it's consistently getting lighter as you're getting stronger. So I'm really torn between placing this in the great versus the essential category. Next up is straight bar dips. Now this offers the same benefits as normal dips, but imposes some additional limitations. Once again, by guiding your elbows out away from your body, you will be able to target your chest better. But the skill requirement of this is now even larger because you have to arrange yourself around the bar and not fall off when you get to the bottom. That means you have to shift your center of mass forward by lifting your legs forward. And the whole exercise turns into this weird coordinating, balancing thing, whereas in reality, like always, during the end of the set, you just want to be stable and able to put load through. That you cannot do with straight bar dips. Unless you're a calisthenics athlete and have limited potential to do presses and flies, it's probably a subpar option. Another bodyweight exercise, push-ups. Push-ups have this great PR, this great reputation that they're an amazing upper bodybuilding exercise. Whereas in reality, now that we have gyms and we don't live in ancient Greece anymore, it's more like an okay exercise. From a joint perspective, wrist limitations will be an issue for some, although it's really easy to work around with different implements that you can use. Similar to a floor press or a barbell press, now your range will be predetermined by where the floor is. It offers very little potential to progressively overload. While on anything else, you can always get a heavier weight, a heavier dumbbell, set the machine heavier, or hang something on yourself. With push-ups, it's just really difficult and awkward to progress them. And as soon as you start progressing them by putting your feet on something else, you suddenly are at a different angle, so you're training different portions of your chest. A massive limiting factor will be core strength here. If you're not able to stabilize your spine and rib cage, you will have a hard time getting the most out of your chest. And once again, if you're trying to load it with external weight on your back, core stability will become an even bigger issue. I find it's a good alternative to burnout, to get a pump as a finisher exercise, once again as like a C, D, or E exercise after multiple other chest variations. It's also probably your best pressing exercise if you don't have any equipment available. But if you have access to a gym, you probably have much better options than a push-up. This has to go in the likely subpar category. Our last exercise is ring push-ups. Using rings immediately eliminates the wrist joint consideration. And now, because the rings naturally want to go outwards, now you're challenging horizontal adduction much more efficiently as well. One way of progressing it over time is letting the rings go further out or positioning them further apart. The further apart you position them, the more they will want to go out and the more you're challenging horizontal adduction again. The same limitations apply as with normal push-ups. You will have to consider the core and keep your spine and ribcage in place. And it's simply impossibly hard for beginners to do a ring push-up properly. Because you're challenging horizontal adduction and shoulder flexion at the same time, I find this exercise is much easier to justify in a program than a normal push-up. If this video has been helping you, please share it on your socials. Right now, the channel is mostly growing organically, so it would mean a lot. So let's go with our results. In the essential category ended up dumbbell presses, Smith machine press, other machine presses, and the seated cable flies. The bulk of your chest work is probably best off being centered around these movements and variations of them. In the great category is barbell press, barbell floor press, pec deck, and dips. These are also always good alternatives to incorporate. Dumbbell floor press, standing cable fly, seated cable pressing, and ring push-ups ended up in the depends why category, meaning some of these can end up in your program, but you have to know why. If the bulk of your program is built around these exercises, you're likely losing a lot of efficiency. Dumbbell flies, externally rotated pec deck, straight bar dips, and push-ups are likely subpar versions, meaning I can only see very specific circumstances where these would be a good choice. And exercises you simply never want to do are guillotine press, dumbbell pullovers, for chest anyway, dumbbell squeeze press, Sven press, Landmine presses, pressing on a physio ball, bandit press, and standing cable presses. Now you can see that the foundation for good chest work is some solid pressing and some solid fly movements. Most of the bottom category just tries to be fancy, tries to offer some alternative or some more interesting movements, but they sacrifice a lot of efficiency when it comes to building your chest. If you're a successful man that enjoys going to the gym but have between 5 and 20 kilos of body fat to lose and have no time to waste doing it, you can work with me directly to make sure that you get to your goal as quickly and efficiently as possible. All you need to do is click the link in the description.